Well, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, let's try that again. Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay.
That's a World War II weekend welcome right there.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to everyone here this afternoon. It's really a thrill to see so many people with us here at General and Mrs. Eisenhower's home here, their beloved Gettysburg Farm. For those who do not know me, I am Ranger Dan Vermilya here with the National Park Service. It's a real thrill to be here this afternoon with our friend and esteemed guest who we will introduce in just a moment. Real quick, I'll ask everyone, if you do have cell phones with you, please do make sure they are on silent during our program here this afternoon so that we don't have too many interruptions along the way on this overcast but still beautiful day. Just a reminder to folks as well that this program will wrap up right around 2 o'clock, and there will still be 1 hour left for exploring the Living History Camp. There's still a 2 o'clock ranger-guided walking tour of the camp that will take place. So still have some time to explore the camp after our program here this afternoon. But I want to begin now by introducing our esteemed guest, Susan Eisenhower. She is an author, consultant, and strategist with many decades of work on national security issues and strategic leadership. Susan is also the author of Mrs. Ike and this book as well, which I have a copy of with me, How Ike Led. And Susan happens to know this farm landscape particularly well. In a way, very few know it. She knows the Eisenhower home in a way, very few know it. And she knows the Eisenhower family in a way, very few know it. She is, of course, the granddaughter of Dwight and Mamie Eisenhower. And I will say as well, I wish every national park site could have friends and supporters and folks who are so central to us doing what we do as we have here with the Eisenhower family. So would you give me a warm Eisenhower welcome for Susan Eisenhower?
Thank you. Sure. Sure.
Thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It really is.
I want to begin by noting that you joined us for a similar conversation-style program back in 2022, several years ago when we began our recent arc of World War II weekend events following World War II year by year. So we're very glad to have you here with us today as we wrap up our programming talking about the year 1945. I want to begin by just kind of setting the stage with where we are. We're here at the Eisenhower farm. What goes through your mind when you're visiting this farm landscape and seeing so many people here on a day like this, on a setting that you know so well? What goes through your mind seeing so many people here at your grandparents' home?
Well, first of all, Dan, thank you, and everything the team here at the Eisenhower Farm does and the National Park Service. I mean, they've done really a remarkable job of keeping the spirit of this place alive, and the interior sparkles, and you should come back at Christmas time. It's very authentic. It's just great. Let's see, a lot of things run through my mind. It depends on whether I'm surrounded by a lot of other people, because I like to focus on them. But when I'm here by myself, I can't, first of all, I can't accept the passage of time. It's gone way too quickly. And I remember so many times here at the farm. But I should just say, specific to that question, I remember the discussion underway in the sun porch in my grandfather's last years about what to do about the farm. And there was a big debate. Should we put it on the market and sell it like it's an ordinary home? Or should this be a gift to the National Park Service? And I don't know exactly how the numbers worked out on that. Of course, I was right in the middle of it. I had my hand up every 5 minutes. I'm known to be one of the more opinionated members of the family, so I was arguing for the Park Service. And I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if most of my generation was arguing for that, simply because I don't think that the adults understood how attached we were to this property. In any case, they decided on the Park Service, but I'm not sure they would have ever completely envisioned what a magnificent way this property is used, how many people go through the house, for instance, or these large events. I was thinking of how much Granddad would love to see Monty Avenue and Nimitz Avenue and all of these other wonderful streets down there. I mean, there's just something very special about it. Let me add one more thing to this. notion. I didn't realize at the time that so many people who were here on the farm had been with him during World War II. I knew about Sergeant Money, who was his, what would you call him, sort of valet, kind of, was with Eisenhower from North Africa all the way through the war and through his two-term presidency. But I didn't know that Arthur Nevins, who actually managed this farm in the Eisenhower retirement, had been at headquarters on D-Day. And so Sergeant Dry, who was Ike's driver in the very beginning of his retirement, took Eisenhower to see the 101st Airborne Division the night they took off for France. Despite everything you see in the movies, it was Sergeant Dry. He did complain about that, as I recall. But anyway, it's just remarkably full of that kind of history and more.
Well, you heard it here. Susan's a fan of the street signs. I think we all are. The street signs in camp are a big hit this year. One other thing I want to ask up front, we've talked about this before. I've heard you share this a lot when bringing groups through on tours of the house, especially student groups. This kind of dichotomy about knowing your grandfather and grandmother so well personally, but also them being president and first lady. It's a very unique thing it must be to write about them in their public capacities, but also know them so well personally. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that dichotomy and how you navigated that throughout your life?
Well, I think a lot of people would say that, for instance, my last book showed no warts in his picture. Actually, I think having the U-2 go down in 1960, I don't think he regarded that as any great success. So I think there are plenty of examples in that book of things not going the way he'd hoped they would. But, there's less and less to complain about when you think about those years in the context of this period of change, because that was a period of huge technological change, social divisions. I mean, we had McCarthy during his presidential administration. There are a lot of similarities. I didn't have a problem writing that book. Maybe some people had a problem with me writing that book, but I didn't have a problem with it because we were, as kids, very compartmentalized. We were taught that way. Your grandfather's career has nothing to do with you. You are to go to elementary school, make sure that your grades are good, and that should carry on through your educational career. And by the way, what does living or being on a farm like this entitle you to? Zero. You go out and do it yourself. I'd just like to remind everybody that this is basically an Army family, okay? And what is the answer to that question? No excuses, sir. I mean, this is my father, but that was very much the ethos. So I would just say that the compartmentalization helped. However, as I get older, it is sort of fun to think about how normal was that childhood really? Not really. Because my own immediate family had Secret Service, as the President and First Lady did, and then that's not so normal when you have big men with guns follow you out onto the playground. But the town of Gettysburg was very, very gracious to all of us. And so, you sort of work through, well, that wasn't particularly normal, but do I feel like I fit in with the American public in general? And have I been working hard to make my own contribution? Yes, I have, and I'm comfortable with that.
Absolutely. So as we're here commemorating and reflecting on the events of 80 years ago in the Second World War, your grandfather, General Eisenhower, is obviously this key figure in the Allied victory and the leadership of it. And it wasn't easy. There were a lot of challenges along the way. It was a very stressful time in his life, in the life of the country, and in the lives of millions all over the world. In reflecting on his leadership and navigating those tumultuous times, what are some of the things that qualities that you think he had that were most helpful in him navigating the stress that he endured during that time?
Well, the question of stress is really an interesting one because he said, he wrote it many times after the war, but we saw it ourselves in this household, which is that he managed self-doubt extraordinarily well, or those kinds of concerns. He thought that one of the big parts of his job during the war was to stay optimistic at all times. If people think there is a chance they're going to fail before they start something, it's very, very hard to mobilize a group like that. And so optimism was something he felt was a important characteristic, and he said he kept his worries and the rest of it for his pillow. Well, that's internalizing a lot of stress, so I even wonder how he managed to do that, since I'm working hard on that principle but not succeeding at all times. I think he had a very strong philosophy about serving something larger than himself, and that he was a bit player, albeit an important bit player, in something that we were all striving to do together. And that kind of capacity to think about a larger goal and a commitment to something larger, I think helped him a lot.
And can you speak to his belief in emotional intelligence as a key quality for leadership? I've heard you, again, mention this frequently in the home, and even when he was chief of staff of the Army, suggesting at West Point they had a psychology department, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. What role did he think emotional intelligence played in this?
Well, I think he thought emotional intelligence, of course, we didn't have an EQ term for that back in those days. This was probably the equivalent of, well, we'll just leave it there because maybe I can expound on that point a little bit later. But I think he had a capacity to see things from someone else's perspective. We used to get this at the dining room table. My brother and I were always usually monopolizing the conversation. And so, he'd intervene from time to time. And he says, well, no, wait a minute, how do you think that looks from the other person's perspective? So we were kind of raised with that analytical tenet. And I think it was very helpful to him. In other words, in thinking about the complexities of this alliance, he actually had the capacity to see it from the other person's point of view. What must it be like for a country like Great Britain, who had been in the war long before we got in there, and suddenly to be taking orders from a 54-year-old American, or even younger than that when he took command in North Africa and Sicily. So you can imagine that was a helpful thing to do. He understood that this must be very hard on the British. And so let me just say, in concluding on that question, in thinking about his qualities that were really successful, I think he was a genius, and I'm going to use the word genius, at knowing when to deploy his ego and when to suppress it. Okay. And this is something that it's almost a skill that we don't even know how to do anymore. So we can't, turn around and blame everybody for not doing that. But just knowing which fights are worth fighting, and which ones where you can afford to let other people win an argument. And I think that is one reason he was able to keep the alliance together.
Yeah, and I think you touched on this next question to some degree already, but in all of the ups and downs, there's times there's more downs than ups. One of the other essential qualities he seemed to have was optimism. Mm-hmm. And this belief in being for something, right? Mm-hmm. Where did that optimism come from?
I think it came from, first of all, if you can only imagine this, he came from a house in Kansas. He was born in Texas, by the way. Grew up in a house in Kansas that had basically 2 bedrooms upstairs, or maybe 3, but very tiny, probably the size of the original Eisenhower house here, which was basically 2 up and 2 down farmhouse. And he was one of 7 boys, 6 surviving boys, who are all big and strapping and very opinionated, all of them. And he was a middle child, and his job was to, among other things, in addition to learning how to control his temper, his other job was to keep people jollied along. And so I think it was his mother who was pretty much the inspiration for keeping these 6 boys from beating each other up all the time. And she said, though, that Dwight Eisenhower, because his older brother was known as Big Ike for a while, Dwight Eisenhower, of all of her sons, had, at a certain age, the most to learn. which is a very elegant way of saying he was in timeout most of the time. In any case, I do think that being for something was very much a part of her own religious ethos. And he was inspired by her creativity and her capacity to help people find ways to cooperate.
Well, I think it's important that we establish some of these things as we start talking a little bit more in detail about 1945 here and some of what that year entailed for Dwight Eisenhower, that he believed in emotional intelligence. He understood key things about the Allied war effort, that fighting together is important, and then he had optimism because he's dealing, even just weeks and not long prior to VE Day, it's still a very challenging road. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit this afternoon is his experience in April of 1945, when Eisenhower is a witness at the Ohrdruf concentration camp, not long after its liberation. I want to ask a little bit about what that experience was like for General Eisenhower, seeing some of the crimes and horrors of the Holocaust and what was taking place under the auspices of the Third Reich with his own eyes. Could you share a little bit for us about that?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of things that are interesting about that story. One of them that I can't sort of get out of my head is what it must have felt like anyway to come from literally predominantly all German family. A German-American family to be sure, but a family that came to the United States, well, it was before the United States, in the 1740s. And that would be both sides of the family. I mean, they grew up on a lot of German culture there in Kansas and the rest of it. And so I wonder whether that doubled the astonishment he felt when he went into Ohrdruf. First of all, he did not buy the argument that nobody knew what was going on. You could smell rotting human flesh from 2 miles away. That's how terrible it was. And he got in there, and if you Google the clip of Eisenhower at Ohrdruf, that's Ordruf, I'm just telling you, I never saw that look on his face. George Patton was so overwhelmed by the whole scene, he couldn't even go into the camp. This is George Patton, okay? But Eisenhower said he was going to go in, he was going to go through every nook and cranny of that camp so nobody could ever say it hadn't happened. And this is a sub-camp of Buchenwald. We're not even talking about Buchenwald. So that night, this is April 12th, that night, that's the same night that Roosevelt dies, and earlier in the morning, he went to the Merkers mine where Nazi loot was stored and practically all of their gold reserves. I mean, he was seeing the theft, the bestiality, that was his word to General Marshall. And he wanted people to come there, and he ordered all soldiers who were anywhere near the newly discovered camps to go in and photograph it. So the chronicle of this Holocaust comes as a result of his orders. Then in his note to Marshall, he said that there will be a tendency to use this for propaganda that it never happened years from now. So he was let me just say, back in his leadership attributes, I think he had an extraordinary capacity to be working for the longer game, and some capacities around how to think through sustainable policy. I don't know if you know it, but a lot of what are the norms in our society today come from the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s. He was kind of ahead of his time in what I'd call sustainable leadership in a way, which is crafting ideas and programs that could last a long time because they were undergirded by cooperation with, in the case of Congress, with the other side, and also the support of the American people. In any case, it was an extraordinary thing. He was completely correct. More than 50 years later, people did say it would never happen, would have never happened. Just like some people think we didn't land on the moon, Anyway, I think I was impressed at that particular incident combined so many things. Now, if I could just add one more thing. My father had graduated from West Point, actually coincidentally on D-Day, and then was in Europe in combat during this period. And he, by his superior, was commanded to go into Buchenwald and to take pictures. My father was an amateur photographer, and he had a photo album this thick of what he saw at Buchenwald. And I was raised on those pictures. My father's grandchildren, my children were raised on those pictures, and even my grandchildren were raised on those pictures. This was just a commitment we made to ourselves to make sure that we didn't forget and we saw what our own father saw himself.
And I want to focus on the decision and the correspondence here. Writing back to Marshall, this was actually his message to Marshall. The things I saw beggar description. While I was touring the camp, I encountered 3 men who had been inmates and by one ruse or another had made their escape. I interviewed them through an interpreter. The visual evidence and the verbal testimony of starvation, cruelty, and bestiality were so overpowering as to leave me a bit sick. He went on to note, I made the visit deliberately in order to be in a position to give firsthand evidence of these things, if ever in the future there develops a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda. I mean, I think when you consider General Eisenhower's life and the legacy that he had, and there's so many different things you could say are legacy defining, but making sure that this is documented was vitally important. That's I would say, one of the most important things he accomplished.
Well, I agree with you. And the interesting thing is it wasn't in his job description. Nobody was asking General Eisenhower to be commanding members of the news media and requesting that members of Congress come over and see for themselves what had happened there. I think that is noteworthy. The other thing is, I think he played a very big role in the reshaping of Germany after the war, because one thing he did, and trust me, I mean, I can't get my head around this one, but he made and ordered that villagers living near these camps had to go into those camps, be marched through those camps, and even bury the dead. I mean, he was as tough as he had to be. And in the case of this period right after Ohrdruf, the mayor of the closest town was forced to go through that camp with his wife, and they committed suicide that night. In other words, this was serious business. But I don't think Germany would have been held to account if we hadn't held them to account. And I think that's a significant point.
I do as well. And I think in our age of social media and things being posted and whether or not they're original primary sources, this is just so vitally important that we have these photographs and this documentation of the Holocaust. You mentioned the photo albums. Was this ever a conversation that your grandfather brought up around you? Or was it something that you ever heard him talk about in a first person?
Well, I didn't, and I think part of that is that he was, when I first came to recognize that that we weren't exactly like every other elementary school kid. You know, he was already in his presidency, so a lot of it was about now the nation's future after the war. But my father talked about it plenty. And I think also my father felt, you know, that responsibility for making sure that we looked after the things he himself had collected. You see, the other thing is you have to remember that a lot of people who were engaged in the war for a long time, and my father, as I say, graduated from West Point on D-Day, so he wasn't there as long as some people, but a lot of people from that greatest generation just didn't talk about their wartime experience. And in a way, it's our loss because we won't be able to tell those stories if they couldn't bring themselves to tell us ourselves because of the trauma. I mean, we've, to some extent, glorified the war, but it was the amount of cruelty and bloodshed and the ways that people lost their lives. I mean, it's really almost beyond comprehension.
Yeah. And within weeks of touring Ohrdruf is VE Day. And amidst this backdrop with the German surrender, as one war is ending, the Cold War is beginning, going from allies to adversaries with the Russians. Can you maybe speak a little bit to how your grandfather, General Eisenhower, navigated those weeks and months in 1945 and questions over whether we stop here and there, and how he navigated that tension?
Well, I think there's clearly a lot of tension, but what I would say, which is not often noted that much, yes, he accepted the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. This was a decision, by the way, of an unconditional surrender was a decision elsewhere. I'm not saying that he opposed it by any means, but it was a decision that we would be expecting an unconditional surrender. You remember we have an armistice in the end of the First World War. An unconditional surrender requires probably a longer campaign, probably more loss of life, but a more conclusive result that this was it. We'd had enough of this in the 20th century. So much so, if I may just add this other little footnote here, Ike's valet, after he came out of Ordre, said he'd never seen Dwight Eisenhower's face look like that. He looked so angry. Isn't that an interesting use of the word? Angry, okay? Ike was so disgusted by what he'd seen from the other side that he would not, he did not personally accept the unconditional surrender. He had his chief of staff sign for him. He did not want to sit in the same room with these people. So they were sent upstairs to his office, and he said 2 questions. Do you know what you signed? And they said yes. And he says, do you know I'm going to hold you personally responsible? They said yes, and he told them to get the hell out. Wow. I mean, that's how bad that was. So you can imagine you have that kind of ending. Then you have the pile-on of, you could say, the rather ambitious plan to have a four-power governance of Berlin and the rest of Europe. Of course, tensions arose around that. Ike was only actually in charge of the occupation period until November of 45. But it was enough time to see that, this would not last forever, probably. In any case, I think probably the most crucial thing that occurred in the rise of the Cold War was not just the question of elections in Europe, but let's not forget we used an atomic weapon at the end, in August of 45. And that was a big deal because the Soviets had agreed to enter the war, but they also realized, since they'd been invaded during World War II, that this was a complete change in military technology and that they would get busy building a bomb too. So this is a complex field. It's one of these situations where, yes, there was full-on closure with the Germans, an unconditional surrender, right? But then it's almost the beginning of another conflict, which you're completely correct, Dan, sees its materialization during the Eisenhower presidency, and actually even had a noted visitor, Premier Nikita Khrushchev, came to this farm in 1959 during the Berlin crisis. This one was about, the Soviet demand that the Western powers withdraw from Berlin. It's called the Berlin Ultimatum, and Khrushchev came to this farm, and I had a chance to meet him.
I was going to say, yeah, I think you have some memories of that, probably, don't you?
Yeah, I do, and it's a very vivid memory, but it's what I call the grandchildren's strategy. And the grandchildren's strategy is what Ike was also very good about. Can you imagine that? Inviting somebody who's threatened, nuclear war or something, inviting them to the United States for 9 days. Actually, Khrushchev was smitten. He thought that, I think it was a brain rearranger for him, but when they got up to Camp David and couldn't reach an agreement about what the governance of Berlin at this particular stage, Granddad called up my mother and told him to get the four of us dressed up and over at the farm in a half an hour. And so, boy, did we get a lecture about what to say and what not to say at that meeting. Anyway, I will say that, the reason I call it the grandchildren strategy is simply that it was a kind of common ground. It was a way of saying without saying that you have grandchildren too, and here are mine, and that's why we're going to figure this out. And I'm proud of the fact, actually, that when Khrushchev got back to Moscow, they dropped the date certain confrontation date, or he did. Also, for those of you who are here from Adams County and other wonderful farming areas in our country, taking Nikita Khrushchev on a tour of the Black Angus cow in the fields here also was another common ground matter, because Khrushchev had been very involved in agricultural policy in the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. Could you share with everyone the items that Khrushchev had during his visit for you?
He gave us two. As a kid, I was always trying to figure this out, everything out that I was seeing. So over at the doorway there, as we came out, and the helicopter was about over there. By the way, Khrushchev did not want to get on a helicopter because, parentheses, that's how they used to kill people in that part of the world. But when they told him that the president was also going to be on the same helicopter, that was okay.
Got it. Put him at ease, huh?
Put him at ease. So we came out the front door there, and Khrushchev dipped into his pocket, and he had little red star pins, which were, of course, a symbol of Soviet power. And he pinned them on our frocks or whatever. And as soon as the helicopter went off, my mother said, "Give me those pins." Well, rats! I wish we'd kept them. They were, yeah. And then the other thing is he left behind things, ornaments that we could put on our Christmas tree, because they used to put them on sort of New Year's trees in the Soviet Union. And that was very dear. And believe it or not, we still put them on our Christmas trees, just because my grandparents did. So we each were given some of those, and I still have them on my trees too.
You'll be happy to know that of the stories that we tell here, the pins being put on you is one of our favorite collective staff stories to tell. I can see a few of our interns from this summer are with us, and we tell them on many a house tour here. So
okay, so I've got to tell you how this affected my career, my whole career trajectory. So that evening, my father said, "Now, no talking about this at school. This meeting didn't happen," and then we gave him a little pushback on that, and he said, "Well, I just want to tell you, this man is no friend of our country." And I got my hand up, of course. David and I were about to start another conversation. And then I had my hand up, and I said, "Well, then why do we invite him to the farm if he isn't a friend of our country?" "Well, that's what your grandfather does for, the American public," things like that. Okay. Well, I never got it. It took me 25 years to get to that part of the world, yes. And I spent, many decades working on U.S. Soviet and U.S. former Soviet Union issues. And that, of course, dealt a lot with arms control and the things they were trying to sort out in Berlin.
Yeah. So it's these experiences he's having in 1945 end up preparing him perfectly for his Cold War presidency.
I think it does too, and it's interesting, during the Berlin ultimatum discussion negotiation up at Camp David, they were said to have spent the morning talking about World War II. Not only trying to find common ground there, I guess, that was Ike's take on it, but also because that is the precursor to how this four-power governance arrangements, that's what it originates from, the World War II. And so he tried to find common ground there. Then he brings them down to the farm, shows them the cattle, the fields. They talk agriculture for a while, and then the grandchildren are deployed. Anyway, thank goodness that we were trying to keep our mouths shut, not to speak unless somebody spoke to us.
Well, I want to have one or two more things here, and then we'll open up for some questions from our visitors today. As we're wrapping up our World War II weekend, we're wrapping up our discussion of the year 1945. Right. I think it naturally lends itself to a conversation about the legacy of World War II. You were here today earlier. In addition to this program, you were bringing students from Gettysburg College through the house and the farm as well, right? Students going to Normandy in an upcoming trip, am I right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Excuse me, could you identify yourselves, guys? Okay.
Yeah.
This group back here are, let's see, Sam Levine, who has been a ranger here at the Eisenhower Farm, was in my class 1 year and came to Normandy with me, and the others, you all raised your hand, thank you for that, are going with me in March.
So let's think about, what would you like us to remember, or what are some key things you think we should remember about the legacy of World War II, especially for our younger visitors here today? There's so many kid activities here over World War II weekend. It's a family-friendly event to bring families and kids out to the site, to the farm. What is the legacy of World War II that you'd like our youth today to keep in mind?
Well, first of all, I just want to say to everyone who planned this event, my heartfelt thanks. But I want to make a special shout out to all of you who participated in this. Do you realize we don't really teach history anymore? What you're doing is not just spending a nice weekend here at the farm, and thank you very much for coming and for involving yourself and actually taking some time to think about my grandfather. But this is really important, what you do. I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes I turn on the TV and I hear people talking absolute nonsense about this period because they just don't know that much about it. So they are kind of echoing what they read on maybe not the most reliable sources ever. So I think that's very, very important. I also think that there is a kind of legacy involved in understanding the principles behind what makes something great. So that generation was known as the greatest generation, but I'd like to say there's no reason why that will be the only great generation. That generation, for all of the suffering and sacrifice and for all the suffering and sacrifice, what they had was something we haven't had in a very long time, which is a common goal and a common experience. And they came away from that strong enough to come back and build this modern society because they were used to working with other people, they were used to being on a team, and they were used to committing themselves to something bigger than themselves. And I'm telling you, we can get that back again, but not only is the shared goal important, but the shared experience too. Our country's sort of fractured into 100 different kinds of lifestyles, and you wouldn't identify with any of them except the ones who live the way you do. So I think there are some real opportunities for finding community programs where people from all socioeconomic backgrounds can work together to do something. That's how our country was founded, with barn raisings and everything else. But I feel optimistic about the future in that way. I hope my students, I hope you're listening over there, will understand the importance of that leadership, especially now today, is to describe a common objective and then help everyone work together to experience the joy of making something that looks dark and hard, bright and promising.
Well, I think that's, yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, it's a generation that saw the worst of humanity, and they came home and worked to build a country that was worthy of the sacrifices, whether it was, my own grandfathers came home and one became a house painter, one worked in a machine shop. Some people came home and painted houses, some people came home and ran for president, right? Yeah, that's right. And I think, but don't ever let anybody tell you that was the last great generation, because it will be a sign that we've given up. I'm not giving up. And I hope before I pass from the scene that I'll have enough students who've had to listen to me rabbit on for a whole year that something will stay behind, and some optimism that somebody like Dwight Eisenhower, who can come from a farm in Kansas and rise to the height of power,
leader of the free world back when there were really no rivals. We were the only country standing practically, and still have that modesty and commitment to bringing people together for a common cause. We're going to get there again, we just are. But we have to be laying the groundwork and finding new projects that we can all help each other bring to fruition.